Hello and welcome again to Special Connections. Tonight, again, I have my wife Jamie and a very good friend of ours and former coworker Chris Wilson from Liberty Resources. Welcome to you
Hello.
both.
Thanks for having
Hello.
me.
Yeah, thanks for
Good to
being
see
here. We
y'all.
appreciate it. So Chris, we're gonna read through your bio real quick. I'll just hit the highlights and
Please do.
then we'll talk about some family and then we'll talk about some work.
Sure.
All right. So Chris has been in the field for a long time, like me. We won't throw too many dates out there and age anyone. But he's been a caseworker in Texas. Got his BA in psychology. Moved to Long Island and did some therapeutic foster care work there. After that, let's see. Well, during that time, you were a Medicaid service coordinator, a rehab supervisor, supported employment, and every other thing in the field. So that's good.
All of the things, yes.
Done it all.
Yeah.
Master's in special education with a focus on autism. And then it was teaching at a private school, right? That was Long Island stuff.
Yep.
Then took a nice vacation for about a year in Iraq. We appreciate and thank you for your service.
Yeah, it was warm. Thank you.
I'll bet. Uh, then up here to Syracuse, working for Liberty, uh, educational coordinator for ISAF, which was an incredible program, but isn't around anymore, so we won't dig into that too much.
Mm-hmm.
Director of ISAF, and then director for the group homes, IRAs, right?
Yep.
And then after that, transition to what you currently do, organizational development specialist, responsible for training and development of 1,500 staff across 3 states.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So you've definitely
Wow.
touched on all of it, which is awesome. Those are my favorite people, the ones that have done everything. Those are the ones you want to talk to because they can at least give you a bullet on anything, even if they can't
Right.
get you all the way there. They can
Right.
give you
That's
at least
that really sums it up. I've heard of a lot of things and can give you a take and maybe point you in the right direction.
That's awesome. That's the people Jamie and I work with most of the time, the families and stuff. That's exactly what they need is somebody that can point you in the right direction, and that's what we spend a lot of time doing. So that's
Hmm.
kind of the whole premise of this.
Good.
On top of that, personally, you and your wife Erin have a couple of kids.
Mhm.
The oldest has a diagnosis of autism. The former Asperger's title originally was on that.
Yeah.
Um, and because of that, not only are you very familiar, but you guys have also participated in some of the local services here in the Syracuse area, right?
Correct.
Um, so I think that's where we should start. We'll do the family stuff, talk about
Okay.
what that's been like for you. Um, and the reason I think it's important to kind of highlight that a little bit and talk about it is Jamie and I have that same, right? We've both worked in the field for a while, but we both have kids with disabilities. And like you and I were talking about just before we got started, that doesn't necessarily promise you anything. Just because you've been in the field doesn't mean much really when you go looking for services. You're in the same boat everybody else is.
Yeah.
There's no special key to the back door or anything. Uh,
No.
so let's talk about that. Getting a diagnosis and looking for services. What was that like for you?
Yeah. So I appreciate you letting me talk about it. I don't know the last time we really spoke about it. It's been an interesting journey and talking about sort of that having been in the field, not getting you anything. The number of people that sort of reached out. My wife and I met teaching at that school for children with autism. So we spent a lot of time around kids with this diagnosis and whatever. And when our son wound up getting a diagnosis, the number of people that sort of reached out and goes, "Oh, well, that kid couldn't have wound up in a better environment." And the two of us staring at each other, going, "What are you talking about?" Like, um, it was really frustrating for the first few years. I think because we put too much pressure on ourselves, having
Hmm.
been in the field, having been trained to work with children and whatnot. And it was a friend of mine. She's actually a supervisor of mine at Liberty at the time, sat me down one day and just said, "Look, your job title when you go home isn't special education teacher, it's dad. And so you need to let yourself be dad, and you need to let yourself be helped, and you need to do the things that parents of children with special needs do. And so I think that changed a lot for us. You know, I started taking a lot of the pressure off of myself and started doing the things that we advise parents to do, right? And working with them, or that we would have advised family members to do when I was working with their children in school, and just started being a parent. And I think that helped out tremendously. Not that, not that the diagnosis itself wasn't challenging. Um, Raising a child that has autism and is different from everybody, right? And the difficult thing about his diagnosis in particular is that he knows he's different, but he doesn't understand why, right? And so you go through all the stuff that I'm sure a lot of your listeners have gone through. You watch um, families, that you met in kindergarten that you used to trick or treat with, or they'd invite your kid over to parties, and by first, second grade, they don't call anymore because of your kid's behaviors. It scares the adults, or it scares the kids, and your kid's the one who's getting physically managed in the third grade and taken out of the classroom. You know what I mean? And um, you worry about his future. Is he going to have any friends? What does this look like for us? Um, and you do what, Adam, you and I actually reconnected around one of the services. Even though we'd worked together, you and I reconnected around one of the services that we utilized, which was the ADA Autism Clinic. And we were pursuing not just some therapy for our son, but also we had him in the ABA program
Right.
for kids. And I know there's strong feelings, folks that have children with autism diagnosis that have strong feelings about ABA. Um, Aaron and I met teaching in a school where we utilized applied behavioral analysis. Um, I think we came at it a little bit differently. I would just say for folks that are, you can find on the internet, you can find somebody that's going to say something negative about every possible therapy there is out there for your kids. And I would just say to folks, go out and experience it for yourself. Try it for yourself and see if it's right for your family and your kid before you make a judgment based on just reading. We joined all the, autism support groups on Facebook and things like that. And if I believed everything they said, I tortured my son every time I sent him into one of those programs. But, um, he did great. He's come a long way. One of the services we used early as a diagnostic service was Liberty Post, which I guess we'll talk about in a little bit. But we actually used their services to help diagnose him early, and then we used their in-home therapy services when he was much younger, and had therapists come to the house. So we've utilized a couple of services in the area in addition to um, obviously having experience now with CSEs and special ed and IEPs within the district. And he now has actually transitioned to a 504 plan. He just finished the 8th grade and will be starting high school next year.
Oh,
So
boy.
yeah,
That's exciting.
it is exciting. So yeah, we've had a range of experiences raising him in the central New York area. Not all of them great, but it's trial and error when you're the parent of a special needs kid. And the services, I mean, y'all know this, the services, they're there one week and then next week they're not, right? Or there's an opening last week, but I missed the call and now there's not, right? It's about being persistent. Some of it's about being in the right place at the right time. And occasionally it's just knowing what phone number to call, or that a phone number even exists, right?
Yeah,
Right.
that's a hugely important thing, is starting to connect with the community. I think a lot of families, parents, because their kids have disabilities and because of those behaviors you talked about, and right, the people that you trick or treated with a couple years later won't even call you anymore. You start to isolate a little bit.
Mhm.
And and I understand that, and we certainly have had that sense ourselves, but it's probably the worst thing you can do if you do it too much, because you start to isolate yourself to the point where now you don't know who to call or where to go or resources. When we did our interview recently with our friend Eric Komar about adaptive sports, that's one of the things we talked about is if you can get involved in just one thing, it tends to build your community more and more, right? Like you said, we worked together, but we didn't really reconnect until we were both sitting in the waiting room uh, over at ADHD and autism, getting services there and having conversations, and that's where you build community sitting in those waiting rooms. I learned a lot about school districts and 504 plans and IEPs in that same waiting room, just talking to different parents. And I started kind of trying to get an idea of what was going on in the school districts by talking to these parents that were from, 3, 4, 5 different school districts, and what worked and what didn't. And like you said, everybody's experience is different too. You can talk to one parent who's got a kid in the same school district you're in, and boy, they're ready to light the building up. And another parent is singing praises. We've had some great experiences in our district. Not always, but a lot of times we have. It's amazing how different it can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Jamie. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead. I was just agreeing with both of you.
I was just going to add on and just say thank you to the both of you. When we started that ADHD autism services for Parker, I used to look forward to coming down there and sitting in the waiting room because I got to talk to Adam, or eventually I met a few other folks, but it was really the first time I connected with somebody who, when you talk to other parents of children with special needs, they just get it. Like, it's okay. You realize how tired everybody is, how angry and frustrated people get sometimes and whatever, and you don't feel so alone anymore. And you just laugh, and sometimes you cry and whatever, and you share stories. But like, that was really the first, I think, reconnection for us. I was listening to you talk about being isolated. That definitely was the description before we got those services. And I was, sat for 45 minutes waiting for them. I had to talk to other folks. So both of y'all were very welcoming at that point. So just want to say thank you while I had the opportunity.
You're very welcome. I didn't know who you were until Adam came home and he's like, "Hey, you'll never guess who I ran into." And I'm like, "I have no idea." And he's like, "Chris." And I'm like, "Oh, I have no idea who you're talking about." And then we got to know each other, and that was great. So sorry, I have like a fly that keeps like landing on my head. Sorry.
That's all right.
You're fine.
So.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. That was kind of the same experience for me. I wasn't somebody that was reaching out to people too much, but we already had a little bit of a connection anyway. And so I'm pretty sure I probably even came home that first time. I was like, oh man, there's somebody there I know and he's talking to me. What am I going to do? And now you and Eric and Doug are probably, my daily contacts for my respite, when we go through these trials and tribulations and moments of frustration. So
yeah, for sure.
I will say absolutely the same. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So before we move on from family, I just want to say how awesome I think it is that he's going into high school and seems to me to have progressed so much over this time. And I think a lot of that has to do with the services he's had, the parents that he's got looking out for him, and it's that accumulation of all those things, right? There's no one trick to all this. There's no cure to any of this. There's how do we learn to live different and get the help and support that we need? And he seems like a rock star, that's for sure. I certainly love the hairdo that he's got going now.
Yeah, he's trying something there. We're going to see about getting it cut in a couple of months, but it works for him. The ladies seem to enjoy it. So
yeah,
it's been, as many folks I think can appreciate, it's been obviously a lot of stuff that his mother and I have done, but there's countless people who've had impact on him along the way. Some we know the names of, right? Because they're the people from the school that call us when he gets in trouble or, whatever else. or as teachers or whatnot. And some are, paraprofessionals or teachers' aides or, art teachers or cafeteria ladies or whomever who really have had an impact on him. Resource officers for sure with him.
Sure.
So just it, I don't want to do the whole "it takes a village," but it really does. He's had a lot of people along the way sort of put a hand on him and shape who he's become today. And we're just thankful for the environment that he's been in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important. All right, let's move on to work. So Liberty Resources, you've been there for what?
17 years.
17 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you know the place a little bit. You've been through a couple of the hallways.
A little bit. Asterisks, though, like saying that I've been there for 17 years suggests, well, this guy is a subject matter expert on Liberty. Liberty has gotten so big, and we do so many things that remember what we talked about before. I can tell you a little bit about each one of them. That's what you're going to get tonight. But hopefully a light bulb, I can share something or shine a light on something that might be of use to some folks.
Yeah, and that's the tool we're looking for with these videos that we've been posting up, is people can watch them, listen, hear a trigger on something that might be a service they need, and at least they have a general idea of what to look for. Liberty Post is a great example, right? Because so on the website, if you go to the Liberty Resources website, and across the top there's all these different things, these services, right? Behavioral health, primary care, crisis services, DD for developmental disabilities, Liberty Post, Aurora. So you hear behavioral health and you get the idea pretty much, okay, mental health stuff, DD, developmental disabilities, you get a general idea. Primary care, people know what that is, but you see the word Liberty Post, nobody knows what that means, right? It doesn't make any sense. So why don't we start with that one? Because you have some experience with Liberty Post. What's going on there?
Yeah, Post is the wing of Liberty that develops and delivers our early education, early intervention services. So they work with kids basically 0 to 5 when the county has responsibility for those services prior to them getting to the district, right, and entering kindergarten. So all of the services delivered by Post happen birth to age 5. They deliver a variety of services. They have a diagnostic program called the Futures Program, which is what we used. Basically, they will come to you and they'll help diagnose. They send a team. I think we had a psychologist and maybe a speech therapist and maybe an OT came, or a special ed teacher. I can't remember, probably a special ed teacher came and did an initial assessment on him in the home. And then they write up some stuff and they give you that. You work with your CPSE committee in your district to do that, right? Your committee for preschool special education. But that then gets you, based on that diagnosis, then you can get access to a treatment plan depending on what the recommendations are and how old your kid is. And like our son got speech and occupational therapy in the home a few times a week. They'd send a related, they call them related service providers, speech therapists, OTs, PTs. Post actually stands for physical, occupational, speech and teaching, so POST. And they'd send those service providers into your home and work with your kid. The goal of early intervention, once you recognize that your kid is missing some of those developmental markers, and most of your pediatricians these days are primed to start asking you those questions around 18 months, 24 months. Once you start realizing that's happening, early intervention's been shown to be the most effective strategy of helping a child with developmental delays close the gap before they get to formal schooling in kindergarten and whatnot. And so that's the aim of those services, is to help sort of bring them up level set as much as possible with the rest of the kids, so that when they start in kindergarten, they don't need as many services as they might have if you just showed up when they were 5 and go, here's my kid. And the school's like, wow, they are way behind. Right. So that's kind of the goal of Post. They operate all over the state of New York. We're actually onboarding a new group in Hudson Valley tonight. They're down on Long Island, out in Buffalo, Rochester, and we operate here in central New York in the Syracuse area as well.
Wow, I had no idea the Post was that big.
Mhm.
That's amazing.
Oh, and they run an ABA clinic in New Jersey.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
in case you're ever in Jersey.
So I'll say this, and we haven't gotten to any of the other things that Liberty does yet, so maybe I'm wrong, but that sounded to me like the number one thing we hear about the most, especially diagnosis. Everybody's desperate to try to find a place for diagnosis. So before we move on from Liberty Post, I'm going to ask Jamie if she has any questions, because I know that the moms and the families that come to her the most, that sounds like the wheelhouse of information people are looking for with her.
Yeah. So a lot of the families that we connect with are just getting started. So who do they call at Liberty to maybe, get on the wait list for a diagnosis, or is there even a wait list right now at Liberty or Liberty Post?
Yeah, no, I would imagine that there's a wait list. I think the last I heard, we were running better than most of the clinics in the area, but still, I mean, the services are highly needed. So I think we were running maybe 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. The last I heard, don't quote me
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that.
Yep.
There's contact information. So diagnosis, particularly through, if you're talking about EI services, is a little bit of a, you got to be persistent about it because you got to go through a few hoops.
Okay.
I would say if you, go ahead, Adam.
EI services? What's that?
Early intervention.
Okay.
But to get the diagnosis up front before you get started with all that. So it's the county's responsibility. And I tell you what I'll do. I'm going to give you a link to the diagnostic development page that Liberty Post has. I also have a flyer, if it would be useful for folks, or like a PDF from the Department of Health on like the step-by-step to early intervention services. It basically talks about who to reach out to. You need sort of an initial caseworker or things like that. So if that would be helpful for folks, but essentially, there's a couple of different routes to go, but essentially what has to happen is somebody has to be alerted, either your district's CPSC chairperson, right? Or sometimes you can call your county directly and say, I need EI services, and we need a diagnosis. So you can start with those folks and say, I need a diagnosis through them. And we'd like to get on the wait list for Liberty Post. And then that kind of gets the whole ball rolling. There is also a contact form on Liberty Post's website that you can fill out. Most of our programs at Liberty have some sort of either coordinator or navigator that we get these submissions through the internet and they get routed to, so somebody can call you back and say, hey, what are you looking for? Can I get you to the right place? So a couple of different avenues to go down, but some of it is probably, like if somebody came to me right now and said, I have a 3-year-old and I need a diagnosis, I would say start with the CPSC chairperson at your district and tell them you're looking for a diagnosis and you want to get started.
Excellent. That's awesome. That's exactly what we needed to hear. That's what our families need to hear. And anybody who watches the Facebook page knows I love the word flyers. So any flyer you got, I'll take. Jamie's binder loves to get new flyers put in it. So I saw her perk up as soon as you said it. So absolutely.
All right, good.
We love being able to pass that information on to families. It seems to help a lot.
I would just say this in closing with Post. I love working with our Post program. I do a ton of training and leadership development for them. They're always trying to work on themselves and their team and their services and whatnot. My wife even provided special education services for them for a little while. So we've worked directly with the program, both received their services and provided their services. I can't say enough about the team, in particular the leadership that works really hard. They're just so focused on the kids and the families. It's it really makes me happy to be associated with folks like that. They're there for the right reasons.
But, you know,
Absolutely.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Jamie.
I was just gonna say one of our kids also received services through Liberty Post. And the person that we deal with is absolutely amazing. So
Good. I'm glad you're having that experience as well. Very good.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And that was what I was going to kind of key in on a little bit, was that we go out of our way in Special Connections not to have negative statements about agencies or services or anything like that, but we certainly like to highlight positives. And Liberty Post is one of the few right now that I always hear positive things about. I Not that I am deeply connected to anything from Liberty Post, but I do when I hear Liberty Post, it's always a positive. I don't think I've once heard a negative in reference to them, their services, or any of the staff that they have.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna jump around a little bit.
Mhm.
So let's jump to crisis services. So I've gotten my diagnosis, I've gotten my early intervention. Now I've got my angry teenager, and they need some support, they need some help, you know, and I'm in crisis. So let's
Mm.
talk about that a little bit.
So as far as kids go, our mobile crisis program is probably the one that's the best fit. We have, over the last several years, we've worked to develop, particularly in our behavioral healthcare division, several different crisis options for folks. We have some crisis respite houses that people could go into and stay and whatnot, but most of the services are geared towards adults in various stages of crisis, right? So substance use, homelessness, things of that nature, mental health. But there is a mobile crisis program, and the mobile crisis program was conceptualized and rolled out. I'm not going to speak like I know the origins of it, but I do know some folks that work in it. And one of the things that they were trying to do was provide some different options for folks that were going through crisis behaviors, where traditionally the only options were a call 911 because the situation's getting out of control, and they send the cops, or they send an ambulance, or they send both. And because neither one of those services, and this isn't to say anything bad about either one of those services, they're just, their subspecialty is not dealing with extreme behavior, right? Whether that's communicative or as a sign of a mental health crisis or something like that. The only options they had were transport, right? And I think most of us know where they would transport you to, right? And they're going to take you down to CPEP. And CPEP's going to put some drugs in you to calm you down and let you sit there for 12 hours, and then they're going to release you. Right? And that was sort of an acute way of dealing with significant behavior problems or mental health crisis or whatnot. So along comes mobile crisis, and the idea is, hey, so we're going to roll out, and these folks, when mobile crisis gets called out, they usually come out with some sort of licensed provider. It's usually a social worker, a mental health counselor, or somebody like that. Typically, they'll also come out with either an advocate or a peer. Peer support specialists are folks that we've hired that have lived experience and are in active recovery in either mental health or substance use or whatnot. And so they can come on scene. Peers do fantastic work. They can bond quickly with folks who are going through some stuff. We also typically will bring out some sort of case manager or whatnot. And the goal is to be able to assess what the true need is on scene and make some recommendations that are more than just, well, I guess strap them to the gurney and let's take them to, to the psychiatric emergency. And so the range of things that these folks can provide, sometimes they just roll out and they're really working with the family more than the child, right? They're working with the family to link them to resources or caseworkers, or call this number tomorrow morning, or whatever else. Sometimes it's a suicide assessment. They get called out to a lot of suicide stuff, right? And they'll do an assessment right there and decide whether that person is safe or not. The cops, the mobile crisis team has a lot of sort of memorandums of understanding with local law enforcement. We had family that worked for a local law enforcement who used to tell me all the time, Chris, they're a godsend. He's like, we'll show up on a scene and somebody's having a schizophrenic episode and whatever. And he's like, call Liberty. And they show up and he's like, it's fantastic. So the goal again is not unnecessary transport, medication, traumatic. I mean, it is traumatic. Maybe you're just having a behavior and you're trying to communicate a need, and all of a sudden you're cuffed and put in the back of a car. You know what I mean? These folks come out and try to provide a little bit more, which is not to say that sometimes the recommendation isn't, hey, we need to transport them and they need to be stabilized and whatever. But there's a whole array of other stuff that this team has access to in terms of support and recommendations that the police don't have, that the EMS doesn't have, and shouldn't be expected to have, right? This is a nice supplemental service to the safety and the security that law enforcement already provides, and they can just call in. It's just part of their toolkit now. So you certainly can call if you're having an issue with a child who is exhibiting dangerous behavior. And I mean, I've got a lot of spackle in my house from when things were thrown and
Sure.
kicked and hit and whatever else, you know. So we've all been there. The line, the mobile crisis line, I can give you the number right here, but we can put it in your link as well.
Yeah.
Is area code 315-251-0800. And if you call that number, somebody's going to pick up. That line is manned 24 hours a day. Sometimes it kicks over to a triaging service at night, and they sort of it always goes through a triage process. They're going to ask you what's going on and whatever, and if there's a significant health risk, they're going to send cops immediately. But it's also possible that the cops don't get called out at all, and our team's just the first one to show up. We don't necessarily have to have law enforcement involved to access our crisis services, and sometimes that's a whole lot better.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So,
sometimes just the presence of the uniform and the officers and everything can be triggering for some people. Absolutely.
well, and I mean, quite frankly, I never thought of this from the service delivery side, but as a parent now, I mean, you got neighbors that want to know why all those cop cars were at your house and whatever. If it's just a couple of people show up in their cars and get out and come in with a clipboard and a laptop, it's far less intrusive. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to leave having given you something actionable that you can do tomorrow. So,
Right. That's huge.
mhm.
What a great service that is. That's only been around for a few years now, right? How long's it been?
I don't know how long it's only been a handful, although I say that my frame of reference, it might have been
I know,
longer,
right?
but they're it's such a popular service that they have spread now. They're up in Oswego, down in Cortland, Cayuga County, and here in Onondaga County and the city of Syracuse as well.
It's amazing. That what a fantastic thing that I just that's been needed for such a long time. I personally am very grateful it exists. As I recall, I believe we've called that number ourselves a couple of times.
We have, yes.
Yeah, and have always had tremendous results and been very grateful for the folks that respond.
Yeah.
We haven't been able to use it for a kid. We haven't had to, I'll say knock on wood, use it for a kid, but we're also dealing with an Alzheimer's diagnosis in the family, and they have consulted for that for us. So very,
Oh, wow.
very thankful to be able to have somebody to call and say, this is what we're dealing with. What can we do?
I'm so glad you said that. I wouldn't have even thought. Sometimes, you get into certain situations and you don't even think to make the connection that would be
Right.
And I work with them, and I didn't. I reached out to one of the directors in the program, and I said, hey, would this be appropriate? And she was like, yes, please call us.
That's fantastic. Man,
Yeah.
that was
Hmm.
so I had a couple of questions I wrote down for that. Maybe one question, I can't remember. And you might not be able to answer this question. I understand that. I just wanted to throw it out there because I feel like a parent is going to watch this and think it.
Yeah.
So we talked about somebody calling the crisis service, what that looks like. Um, I think some parents sometimes are afraid to call, whether it's the police or a crisis line, because they think you're going to come take my kid or maybe adult child or whatever. You're going to take them away,
Mhm.
or I'm going to be in trouble somehow or something. And I just kind of wanted to get your thought on that, if you had any.
Yeah, so there's no part of our service that's going to take anybody out of the home. That being said, everybody that would report is a mandated reporter, just like most of us are
Yep.
in this job. And if there is an unsafe situation, they'd be required to report that, to CPS or whatever, APS, depending on what the situation was. That being said, that's not what their goal is. They don't show up like CPS would show up. They show up to assess the safety of the situation for the individual that's having the issue and to support the individuals that are there taking care of the person, right? And so, again, while 100% can't say that dominoes wouldn't be knocked over if there was a truly unsafe situation in the environment or whatnot that necessitated a report. But that's not why these folks come out here. They're not coming out because somebody called them and said, you should go check on them.
Right.
They're coming out to offer you assessment on scene and to offer you resources and support.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Okay, let's broaden out a little bit. We kind of started tight and we'll broaden out now. So seeing as we just went through crisis services, let's talk about behavioral health as a whole when it comes to Liberty Resources.
Yeah.
What what's in the bucket? What do you guys got?
The main interface, I think, if we're talking about services for kids, that I probably would want to highlight, because most of the services are geared towards adults. But if we're talking about services for kids that might be struggling or whatnot, I think the thing to make people aware of is that, and I don't even know how many school districts that we're in, but Liberty has mental health counselors or social workers, therapists, essentially embedded in most of the school districts across Onondaga County.
Mhm.
We have 70 school-based therapists that work for us right now that are in schools, not at Liberty. And so the goal is to make sure that folks have accessible services. There is a mental health crisis right now with kids. Our daughter recently developed some panic attack type stuff, anxiety, things of that nature and whatnot. The wait list for the Liberty person at her school was not insignificant. But again, that feedback's been communicated in terms of resources and people being able to get what they need. So I anticipate seeing those wait lists come down over time. But just understanding that in addition to the school social worker that already is assigned to most schools, and if it's not Liberty, there's some other agencies in the area that do this. I think Arise has school-based therapists as well. Understanding that agencies like Liberty and Arise have therapists in place, not just for your child, but also can help family members in terms of referrals. They'll certainly see your child at school, pull them out, and talk to them and whatever. But most of the time, they're sort of doing an assessment. And if you guys need ongoing services, they're trying to help link you to those.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really important kind of frontline tool for people to be aware of. They're doing the work, whether you're aware of it or not. I think just shining a spotlight on the fact that they're there in case you're seeing something at home. Schools, whether it's fair or unfair, become kind of like the cops. We want the police to be everything for us, right? In terms of safety and all this stuff and whatever. And schools become that as well, right? The place where we get everything: food, counseling, shelter, whatever else. So if parents are in need and you're seeing something at the house and you don't know where to call, it's worth calling up to the school and saying, hey, do y'all have any of those school-based counselors that maybe I could consult with? At least it's a start.
Mhm.
Absolutely. That's huge. And it's another one of those resources that you don't know is there until somebody tells you, and it's just not, a lot of this stuff just isn't, there's no commercial on live TV telling you all this stuff. There's no like constant regular information being pumped out. It's just not something people know about. And and like you said, sometimes we kind of have an expectation for the schools or whoever it is to be all these things for us, and they're not necessarily equipped to be all that. But when there's somebody like that available, it's a huge resource. I couldn't believe the amount of folks that are in the school districts that had never heard of OPWDD, the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, and didn't know what that was. And that's not because they're doing something wrong. It's just information they didn't have, so they
Right.
can't pass it on to a parent if they don't know about it. So like I said, it's so important for the families and stuff to connect somewhere. Just find one thing, make one connection, whether it's on a Facebook page like ours or YouTube video, hanging out at some adaptive sports thing, whatever it is where you're making that connection can take you so much farther once you start down that road. And that's one more great resource to have that in the schools is amazing. Okay, let's move on to, well, let's jump to the other side. There's DD services at Liberty Resources, Developmental Disability Services. That's the world that I've spent most of my time in. When I worked for Liberty for about 15 years, that was the division I was in. So what do they got going on?
Our DD division has 14 group homes, 2 day habs, one in Onondaga and one in Madison, a ComHab program in Onondaga County, and a big self-direction program, which is the big thing, right? That's where all the growing is doing
Yeah.
these days. So yeah, I mean, they're fairly stable, unfortunately, right now in terms of the pendulum of services, right? There's not a lot of growth in disability services, even in self-direction. I was talking to the supervisor there the other day, and they said they're not funding new contracts currently. They're waiting for more money to be released and whatnot so people can get their budgets so that they can get started. So the nice thing about that particular situation is usually it's the other way around. There's a bunch of people who've been approved for services and no staff. In the self-direction model right now, what I'm hearing is we're ready to take on, 30, 40, 50 more cases. OPWD just has to fund their budgets and let's go,
Yeah.
So all of our disability services, I'm sure most of your participants know this already, all of the OPWDD services, you got to go through the front door to get qualified for those. And that's the process for getting in there. And then depending on which service it is that you're looking for, the referrals kind of look differently, but front door is the best place to start for all things disability related with OPWDD.
Right.
Mhm.
Let me ask you this. Every place I know, everywhere I go, you go through the front door, you get approved for services, and pretty much no matter what the service is, you're pretty much on a wait list. That seems to be pretty consistent everywhere you go. The thing that I tell everybody, and I'm curious if I'm right about that or not, and I'm more than happy for you to tell me I'm wrong if I am, is the best thing to do is go ahead and get approved for services and get on every wait list you can get on and just wait and hope for the best, because at least that's a road towards, if not actually getting whatever service you're after.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's about having your name in the right place at the right time, and about exploring what the option is when it's presented to you. This maybe sound like a rough recommendation or whatever, but just this is kind of the state of affairs of services for folks with developmental disabilities right now. If somebody calls you and says we have an opening, go explore that opening.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Don't say, well, we're I mean, unless, and obviously if there's some logistical issues and whatever, but the days of, we were really hoping for this one that's 5 minutes down the road or whatever else.
Mhm.
Services are so few and far between, unfortunately, where we're at right now in this country in terms of the way that we're treating folks with developmental disabilities. If somebody calls and has an opening, I would at least explore it. I'm not saying jump at it, without vetting it, but don't turn anybody down if you can help it. At least right now, that's my recommendation.
Yep. I agree 100%. Awesome. All right. I just wanted to make sure I was saying the right thing when I'm saying that, but that was kind of the vibe. So I felt like that was the right answer.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about, there's two more I wanted to make sure we highlight. Oh, primary care. So you guys have primary care and a pharmacy. I don't know that a lot of people realize that that's a Liberty thing as well.
Yes. So yeah, we have a primary care clinic over at our 1045 James Street location, and the pharmacy is embedded in that building as well. It's operated by another organization called Genoa, but they have their services there. What's cool about our primary care is a couple of things. One, it's an integrated care system. And so what I mean is on that site, we have the primary care services, but we also have some of our behavioral health services there, our therapists and whatnot, and we have the pharmacists. And so it's possible that a client sees their doctor for primary care there and sees their therapist for their behavior care and gets their meds there as well, right? And all of those entities work together. They meet on a regular basis to discuss the cases. So it's not like you having to say, all right, but I have diabetes. So is this med that you want to give me for my schizophrenia, is that going to interact with my whatever? I mean, you should always advocate for yourself, but the group there is working together behind the scenes to make sure you're getting the most consistent care across those systems. It's a really cool concept. It's hard to pull off. They do it really well, I think. And of course, not everybody needs all those services, but that's one of the benefits of being able to get in over there, is that you have, I'm going to say it's one of the benefits of coming to Liberty in general. Like, let's even talk about the school-based therapist, right? The school-based therapist may meet with you or listen to what your family situation or and say, listen, I don't have anything I can help you with directly, but I'm going to refer you to this program at Liberty or ask you to call so-and-so, right? We try to work really hard internally and make sure that everybody understands all of the services we have. That's quite a challenge, by the way.
Yeah.
But so that when you interface with somebody in some capacity at Liberty, if you need something else, right, they can maybe make a recommendation about how, and as long as you're here, why don't you talk to this person? And don't misunderstand, we're not trying to be the end all be all of everything. We'll refer out to other agencies if we know about it, or other resources in the community, whatnot. We're not trying to be, once you're here, you're ours, right? That's not the goal. But we do also understand that there's a lot of social determinants that go into people's health overall, right? And we see you as a whole person, not just the symptom that you're presenting in front of us right now. And so we try to address that system as a whole if we can.
That's fantastic. I think that's, as you were saying all that, it sounded a lot to me like, I keep saying you got to connect somewhere, right? So that you can connect to a community and use that community to find all the different resources you need. And so if you can make a connection in Liberty Resources to one service, now you're a part of a bigger community, right? And that might benefit you in finding everything that you and your family might need. Because that's definitely one of the other things that Jamie and I realize in all the families that we're talking to is there's an individual who has whatever particular need they have, and then there's mom and dad and brothers and sisters and all the supports and resources that they need. And it's nice when there's something like Liberty Resources where you can kind of key in on that and take care of everybody. and having a location like 1045 that has several of those services in one location. I mean, and I know, you know, uh, we're out in Liverpool for one service, and we're down on James Street for another service, and we're in North Syracuse for another, and you're all over the place, right? So if you can even get a couple of those things at one place, that can take a lot of stress off for a family, and a lot of the burden kind of reduces at least a little bit just from that one simple resource of having a couple things at one place.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And it's not apples to apples, but the comparison I always think of is I go down to the local VA for services. And it's the same thing. You go in there and you see your primary care, and if she wants blood or wants you to get an x-ray or wants you to do whatever, you can take care of it all in that building before you leave for the day, right? And so certainly we're not at that level in terms of service, but we're starting to get to the point where we're providing those things, or at least can make the linkage to services. And we're turning on new stuff all the time. I didn't talk about one of Post's new acquisitions is an audiological clinic at our Glacier Creek location. So if you have anybody, we work with all ages. We've got a veterans contract. We also do kids, whatever. If you've got somebody that needs a hearing test, there's audiological services over there. And one of our affiliations as an organization, they're not part of Liberty, but we're affiliated with Aurora of Central New York. They use our administrative services, me, HR, finance, and we work with, so they use our back office functions, and they also have an office in our 1065 James Street building. Aurora provides services for the blind, visually impaired, and hearing impaired. And so we've gotten a lot of cool stuff there. I was looking at something the other day regarding kids. Oh, low cost hearing aids. So they have a grant or a funding program. If your child needs a hearing aid, and specifically, you can reach out to them, and they have some low cost, some funding for some low cost options for a child that might need a hearing aid, which I would imagine, I didn't go through that process, but my wife and I were talking about how much of a pain it is to buy shoes for kids that keep growing and whatnot. I would imagine the same thing comes to durable medical equipment, right?
Sure.
Hearing aids and whatever. So having a resource for that might be useful.
Yeah, Aurora was going to be my next stop. They're fantastic. My brother has been using Aurora since my entire life. He's been with Aurora. I actually just not that long ago, when he moved into his apartment, I needed a strobing fire alarm, and called them on the phone, and a quick conversation, and they had one sitting on the front desk for me. All I had to do was run down and grab it.
Yeah, you want to talk about people that organization has been around for 100 years, and it's literally, we just celebrated that last year.
Yeah.
You want to talk about people that heart and soul, I mean, are there for that population, for like fierce advocates as well, for accessibility and things of that nature. I really, it's been a pleasure. I've only had the pleasure of working with them for about the last 6 years since I took on this role, but it's been a great learning experience for me, and enjoyed working with those folks quite a bit. I'm sorry I'm bouncing all over the place. I did want to address one more thing about primary care real quick, kind of a new
please.
thing for Liberty. They recently, and again, this is going to be something I cannot speak super intelligently about, but just to put it out there because I think it might make a difference for some folks. Liberty's was recently awarded the designation of what's called a federally qualified healthcare center, FQHC. Technically, they're a lookalike. I won't get into all the details, but what's important, I think, for your listeners and what that means is an FQHC is a designated, is a federally funded designated area that's supposed to provide services for folks that are high need in low income situations. And so anybody in theory can come in and get services from an FQHC, regardless of your ability to pay. And so why I think that's important is there's usually a lot of questions about, hey, so I need a doctor. Well, what insurance does your primary care take or whatnot? I would say to folks that if you're sort of in that position of, I'm not sure if anybody will see us or whatnot, check out the primary care webpage. There's a couple of different links. You'll start to see them. There's a link that says, hey, ask about our sliding fee schedule, right? Or a link that says, send an email to our benefits team to see if you're eligible for discounted healthcare services or whatever. This FQHC thing is really new for us, but I want to encourage people to reach out and sort of see what the accessibility is. If you need another model for that in this area, Community General is an FQHC. So if you're familiar with how services work there, Liberty is supposed to be set up the same way.
That's incredible. That's definitely good information to have.
Thanks.
So here's the other thing I wanted to ask. Because Liberty is involved in so many things,
Mhm.
I'm confident I probably missed something. Are there other services that Liberty provides that I did not key in on at all?
We didn't talk about, we do have, ironically, we didn't talk about our child and family division at all.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
Those services, though, are largely the sort of, they're like, I don't want to say reactive services, but those services are like your foster care, or your multi-systemic therapy programs, or things that like families get referred to either through court situations, right? Or a variety of other things. They have a lot of family specific therapies and things of that nature, but the referral process is usually a little convoluted. It's not like you walk in and you say, I need those things. They're, when I say reactive, I mean somebody says, hey, you need this kind of deal. But yeah, we have a large footprint with those. I think we're in 8 or 9 counties with those services.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
So
Yeah,
Well-
those are fantastic things. All right, so I try not to keep these too long, but I do anyway, and I can't help it because there's things to talk about, and I want people to hear it. And the last one, I ended up putting up a couple of certain spots I told people you can jump to, and maybe I'll do the same. But I want people to listen, because I want people to get as much as they can.
mhm.
So before I ask the last question that seems to be coming my closer, are there any other things that you want to share from Liberty, Jamie? Are there any questions that you want to ask Chris while we have them?
No, I think you covered quite a bit, Chris. I think you gave us all, little tidbits of each of the different services that you guys provide, which is great. I'm actually thinking of a couple of families that have reached out that this is really going to help them quite a bit. So I really appreciate that.
I'll just close and say our marketing director has been working on making sure that the website is up to date. And you'll notice, or at least I notice when I look at it these days, a lot of different contact points, a lot of different phone numbers. Liberty is also on a lot of different social media feeds. I think Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I don't know if they're on Twitter or X, whatever it is. But that's also another way that you could reach out. We're trying to make it easy for people to get a hold of us somehow and ask a question so that we can kind of guide you in the right direction. And I'll say this, sometimes a contact will come in from online. Somebody will fill out the contact us, whatever. And the person who gets it doesn't know who it goes to, but we'll send it to, like, sometimes I get it. They'll send it to people who have been here a while and know lots of people, and we'll all kind of put our heads together and go, we should ask this person. So even if we don't know where it goes, it's not like somebody looks at it and goes, and just deletes it. Like, people are really working behind the scenes to make sure that somebody gets connected to these folks. So I guess what I would say is, as far as our website goes, click around, dial some numbers, and just reach out to folks.
Yeah, that's where you got to start. That's certainly what we did. And, like we talked about at the beginning, we may have some years in the field and have worked for a few different agencies, but it doesn't mean we know it all. And Jamie and I certainly have just made phone calls before and just started asking questions and maybe we had the wrong person and it took 3 or 4 calls and all that to find what we needed. But sometimes that's what you got to do, is you gotta make that effort.
Yeah,
I
for
will
sure.
say I went on the Liberty website to kind of get an idea of what we were going to talk about and put some of these questions together. And I felt it really easy to navigate, had a lot of great information. You really knew where you were going and what you were looking for. It was quite helpful.
Yeah, shout out to Allison Bowman, our marketing director. She's really been trying to make sure that people can find what they need.
Nice. That's awesome. We will have links on the bottom of this video. I will say the last one I put up, for whatever reason, I couldn't seem to figure out how to get those links clickable. You'd have to copy and paste them into a browser. But I will try to remedy that and make sure I know what I'm doing so that the links are actually clickable so that you don't have to do that. But if folks are watching this and you go and you see that they're not clickable, copy it, paste it up in the browser, it'll take you right to it. But I will try to fix that and make sure I know what I'm doing. All right, so last thing, a dad with kids with disabilities, you've been a professional in this field for many years. I asked our friend Eric, who is also a friend of Chris's, to kind of give a word of encouragement. His was adaptive sports, so he was encouraging kids on how to convince their moms and dads to let them play adaptive sports. I'm going to ask you for some encouragement to the moms and the dads out there. It's a hard road. It's a lot. It's overwhelming. It is so easy to get burned out before you even touch a website or make a phone call and then fill out applications and all of that. So how do you encourage moms and dads to keep going and get through those tough moments like that?
Um,
Yeah, I didn't
this
prep you with any of this ahead of time. I wanted to hit you in the moment.
I understand how this is going to sound, but what I'm going to say to folks is it is a choice to choose to be positive throughout this journey. It is real easy to find reasons to give up, to be mad, to yell at people, to fight. One of my first roles at Liberty was as an education coordinator. And so I wound up in a lot of CSE meetings that people just come prepared to do battle at CS meeting. Like it's the old, arena with the gladiators and whatever. And it doesn't need to be that.
Right.
We've built it up, and I understand that it feels contentious, and I understand that it feels personal, and I understand that there are exceptions to the rule. But as somebody that has worked on both sides of the equation, and I'm sure y'all could back me up on this,
Yep.
nobody got into these fields to deny your kid services. That wasn't my life goal, was to make sure that none of these kids get what they need, right? And I think we all, and maybe you don't. There's a family that I worked with and I served, and I mean, we used to go heads up, and I remember us screaming at each other a couple times in a hospital around, it was a tense situation with their kid. I remember us crying in the driveway of a house one night together, just very difficult situation. And then that parent wound up working in a nonprofit doing the same stuff that we had done. And I saw them a few years later in a training, and they came up to me and said, I get it. And not everybody needs to go through that experience. I will say that along our journey, and of course, I've had the benefit of being on the other side of the classroom or the other side of the therapy room or whatever, but trying to build relationships with the service providers, trying to empathize with the service providers and understand that they come to work every day and get paid next to nothing to try and help us and help my kid. And that a lot of times they're buying their own supplies and they're doing their own things. And just saying thank you. And it didn't have to be any crazy, gift or anything. I write the teachers a letter at the end of every year and just talk to them about how I've seen my kid change this year. And some of those teachers have come to me and said that's some of the most meaningful thing that they've gotten, because they can see the impact, right, that their kids had. But choose to be positive, choose to develop relationships. Not everybody's going to be a winner. Not everybody's going to be your cup of tea, right? But you'll find more often than not that you'll build relationships with people, and these folks will go to the mat for you and your kids, right? And they'll provide. Your kid then winds up, I guess this is what I want to share. Your kid then winds up in a much healthier emotional situation if I'm not fighting and screaming at and pointing and accusing their service providers.
Yep.
Right? We're all on the same page. We all agree this is tough. We all agree that we're making sacrifices. And I just can't say thank you enough to y'all that work with him for 6 hours a day or whatever it is. Right? That creates an emotional environment for my child that's not contentious, because the kids can pick up on it. Y'all know it. And if you don't know it, you will. When mom and dad are fighting, the kid gets upset. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I know it sounds simple and cheesy for me to just say choose to be positive, but this is a long road. No matter how much you cut it, we don't need to add to our load. We can choose to be positive, and we can choose to find things to be grateful for along the way.
That was fantastic. I couldn't agree with you more. I want to end with your words, so I'm not gonna voice my thoughts on all that, because I agree with everything you just said and have a million examples. But yes, you're absolutely right. I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I knew that Liberty Resources was absolutely one of the agencies that I wanted to get a video up for as quickly as possible for our families. And I'm just so grateful that you were able to come and share all this information with us. Jamie, thank you for joining us again.
Mhm.
It was just fantastic. So thank you. And I'm sure we'll be talking again very soon.
Sounds good. Thank you all for inviting me. I appreciate you for doing this.
Thanks,
All right,
Chris.
guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.